drive, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. Can you? Is it easy to edit?
Email.
Is it easy to edit that recording if we want to truncate, say, the first few minutes?
It is. We can do that. We can do
Okay.
that.
Well, then I've started it now, and then I don't have to worry about that in a minute, and so we'll just truncate the first couple of minutes because we won't start here for another 4 or 5 minutes. Well, actually,
well, then I would. Yeah. Don't start the recording until you're ready to start.
Okay. All right, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and begin. It's 1 after, but people will join us. I am recording this, and we'll possibly make this available to anyone. I'll check. Tracy Dean will have information as to where that will be at. So thank you, everyone, for joining our OneSite quarterly release. The quarterly release will actually happen tomorrow night. We are still calling this the Q4 2013 release. And initially, this was scheduled to be released in December, hence the name of the release. But because accounting is such a critical, because December and January are such critical times for accountants, we did not want to do anything to confuse users. There are some changes to some screens, and any changes to screens and user interface often creates questions, and so we didn't want to create any confusion. There's always also a remote possibility of introducing an issue, and certainly we don't want to do that at the heaviest time of the year for accounting. Hence, it was actually scheduled on purpose for February for those very reasons. We have a number of features in this release, and for convenience and for the sake of this demo, I've broken those into 5 different categories. There's actually about 11 or 12 different significant enhancements, and I've broken those down so we can understand the benefit of these changes to our users and also see exactly what has changed in these. The first area that I'd like to speak to would be that of issues or enhancements that we've added to the system to give administrators of OneSite accounting in each company a better control over how their accounting is actually administered. The most significant of those 2 changes would be the ability to restrict entity access to specific bank accounts. This has been a feature long in coming. It's a very complicated procedure. We spent a lot of time designing it right, but it is finally available in this release. What this feature does is it gives administrators the ability to control which entities have what access to bank accounts. Bank accounts, by this I mean that are entity, top-level bank accounts, not entity level, but top-level bank accounts, and these are for multi-entity environments. When the restrictions are turned on, the bank account list will show those bank accounts that are available to all locations if they're at the top level, or if they're at the entity level, only for those bank accounts that can be used at the entity level. As each of you know who are familiar with OneSite accounting previously, any bank account that was created at the top level was accessible to all entities in all locations. And so we've made this so that it works for both checking accounts and savings accounts, and again, for those created in a multi-level environment or multi-entity environment, and those bank accounts at the top level. The way this is configured is the user will go to the company subscriptions multi-level entity, and someone just joined us. If you could please mute your phone, I would very much appreciate that. So what the user will do, he will go to the top level. He'll go over here to company subscriptions, and in the subscriptions area, and I'll talk about the changes to this window in a minute, they'll click on the multi-entity console, and in the multi-entity console area you will see a new option here in this multi-level, multi-entity configuration that allows user right here, if you can see my cursor, to select bank accounts and or checking accounts that will be restricted to selected entities. Also, once you've set those checking accounts up at the top level, the user will also need to go to each individual bank account, and at each individual bank account they will need to be configured, either checking accounts or savings accounts. So for example here, if you have multiple checking accounts, in this case I've only got 2 in this particular data file, I'll go into my checking account and edit it, and then I'll go to the option for restrictions here. I'll click on the restrictions, and you'll notice the restrictions is a new tab. In fact, this tab will not show until the user has done the step we just went through, which is to turn on those restrictions. If you were to turn those restrictions back off, this tab would disappear. Once the user clicks on these restrictions, the user would then choose whether they want to have this bank account unrestricted, which is the default, and also the way it is today. They can also select to have it restricted to the top level or restricted to specific entities. If the user selects restricted, then the user can pick and choose which entities that bank account will be restricted to. So is there any questions on that? All right. Okay. Now, let me give an example of how this might work. Let's say we have the following situation. We've got 4 banks. One is an unrestricted bank. In other words, we have not restricted it at all. We have the Chase Bank, which we have chosen to restrict it to entities location A and B. Community Bank and Wells Fargo Bank have other restrictions, and then we have 2 different levels of users, one who is restricted to certain locations and one who is not restricted to certain locations. This little chart here, and this will also be in the release notes, which I'll be sending out by tomorrow to all those who are invited to this meeting. You can see the different levels of control as to who can do what, where. For example, if you can see that Bank of America, which was an unrestricted bank, is actually unrestricted to all entities here if the user is unrestricted, but if the user doesn't have access in this example to the top level, and that is a corporate entity, then the user won't be able to see it at the corporate entity level because of the user's restrictions. Likewise, you can see that Chase, which is restricted to entity A and B, for the unrestricted user or the user who has access to those entities has access to that to Chase Bank at the top level and for locations A and B. Now, for your information, if the user at the top level chooses a bank that is restricted to entities and chooses an entity at the top level for bills that are for entities that are not within the purview of that bank, then when the user goes to save that that bill for payment, they'll get a message saying that they have to select a bank that can be used. So it's actually a very powerful, a very neat feature, one that's, like I say, we put a lot of effort into this, and we feel like it's something that users will really enjoy in terms of giving them much better control over what they need to do to manage their bank accounts. Another feature that we've added that gives users more control over who can do what is the ability to control through permissions which users can void or reverse transactions from the bank register or check register's reports. This would also implicitly include the general ledger report, which in reality, when you click on a void or drill down in the general ledger report, you're actually coming to these reports, so it restricts those abilities to reverse or void transactions from the general ledger also. You can see here in this little graphic we have on the bottom here, this is a graphic that shows what the check register would look like for a user who has void permissions. We really don't know if this user has reverse permissions because this particular report doesn't show it, but if the user did have If this report did have reverse transactions permissions, that would also show here. For users who don't have those permissions, the transactions will still appear. The link over on the far left will simply not appear. So that's how that's controlled. So let's look for a second here on the at the permissions. As an example here, we'll show just what the accounts payable permissions. It's the same as it is for all permissions process, and this includes roles, which ultimately winds up on these screens. You can see here we've added this new permission called void. The void or the reverse permission was actually added in the last release to the cash management transactions permissions, but in that case even though the permission was there, it wasn't activated until this release. So the reverse and void permissions are now active and will control what that user can see based on his permissions. Again, if anyone has a question, please feel free to interrupt. We've also added two enhancements to give users more power and functionality, make their job easier. One is the ability to export journal entries with a click on a link to Excel. This would be individual journal entries. And also the ability to automatically create a bill for credit card transactions that are added to OneSite Accounting through the credit card import process. So looking at the export transaction or the export to Excel, what the user will do here, and let's just go into the live product, if they go into their general ledger and they can get to the journals, they can get to the same place either by clicking this journals link or the journal entry link. I'll click on the journals link for the sake of this discussion. We'll then go to a list of all of the journals. The user will then click on transactions, and in the transactions window here we can see that there is a new link. This link right here on the second to the far right column is a new link, and this user simply has to click on this link. That will download the transaction. The user will then click on this little download icon here that appears in the upper right portion of the window. He'll download that transaction, and then here is that particular Excel transaction that they can export. This is particularly useful for users who have very large transactions. We have OneSite Accounting users who may have hundreds of lines in a given Excel, in a given journal entry. This allows users to use the power of Excel in manipulating or finding a particular line item. Let's say that I was a user, and this is a Excel transaction that had approximately, it has 31 lines in it. And let's say I wanted to filter this report so that so I could find out which transactions are for a particular property. To do that, I would simply click on my filter. I would highlight the Excel sheet, click on my filter, and then over here in this column I could simply select Oak Meadows, for example, and then examine the lines in that journal entry for Oak Meadows. Again, this is an Excel feature, but I'm showing you this to illustrate the power of what we can do once we get, or once the user can do, once the user gets the transaction into Excel. Okay? Okay. We also have created a feature that uses the credit card import, and what we have done with this, or what we've added to this, is it's the same import or similar to the import feature for importing credit cards as we've had already in the current release. But the feature here is that if the user completes, we've added two new fields or columns to this particular template. One's called payoff and one's called payoff date. If the user fills out the proper information, and I'll show you an example of this in a moment, if the user fills out this information, the system will then create a bill in the same manner as if that bill had been created by adding the charge card transactions, creating the charge card payment through cash management. That then will show up as a bill in the bills list, which is so it saves a couple of steps and makes the job much easier for users to get the credit card transaction in the system, and saves them some steps here. So as an example here, I'll show you how this would be done. The user would go into the company screen and click on the Open Setup if it's not already open. In this case, we've already got the setup screen open. The user would then go to the company setup checklist. In the company setup checklist, towards the bottom, we have a section called Setup Cash Management. Under the Setup Cash Management section of the company setup checklist, we have this credit card transactions line. The user would simply click on the template. It would download the template, as you can see we just did. It creates this template. The user would then fill out this template, and I'll give you an example of one that I've already filled out here. This is a template that I filled out, that I used the template that I downloaded. What I've done here is I've simply made this line, second line, just a little bit shorter so I can see what I've done. And I've also deleted columns for my own sake that I don't need, columns that are not required or columns that don't apply to my particular company. I've deleted those, so what I've left here, got left in, is a template that has the required essential information, and then I went ahead and just created my transactions, or I could have imported them or created this from my credit card bill, possibly, if my bank provides that capability. I then went in, and for 4 of these transactions, I said I actually want to create the bill for those 4 transactions. So what I did is as required by this feature, I added true to this payoff column, and that means yes, do it, and then I added the date. And both of these are required if I want to have the system create the bill for these credit cards. For the sake of illustration, I also left those 2 columns blank for 4 other transactions. So when I imported these 8 transactions, it imported all 8 of them, but it only created a bill for the 4 that I told it to create the bill for. Pretty neat. All right, any questions on that? Okay. All right, moving on. Let me see if I can show back the screens here. We've covered this, and so move on to additional features that we've added. We have added 2 features to the check writing capabilities. As any of you know who work closely with OneSite accounting, the check writing functionality is a major feature or a major part of the program that many of our users use. People write hundreds or even thousands of checks each week, and so we're doing as much as we can to make this process easier. One thing that we've had requests for is the ability for users to print checks on pre-printed check stock. By pre-printed check stock, this is check stock that users can purchase that already has the MICR line, which is the information at the bottom of the check already encoded on the bottom of it. For example, here you can see on this example here, this bottom line here is what we call the MICR line. By definition, that will be printed on pre-printed checks. The user can also have an option to order those checks with their company name, or we can have OneSite accounting print the company name. The pay to the order of and the rest of this information and the check number is also included on that check. Notice, however, that a pre-printed check does not have the signature line, and this is so that you can configure whether a check will require one line or 2 lines or be signed. And so this is, it allows a lot of flexibility in that particular sense. Some of the advantages of this particular the check stock is that it does not require any special ink. It's very easy to align. A lot of users have to go through back and forth a couple of times to get the exact placement of their micker line on their printer, because that micker line has to be in a very exact spot for the bank's check readers to read them accurately. But with pre-printed checks, it's a given that that micker line is in the right spot, because that's what the user is. That's one of the things the user pays for and the benefit for that user. However, there is some considerations when the user decides whether he wants to use pre-printed check stock or the existing plain check stock, as you can see here on the right side of my screen. If the screen is blank, if the check stock is blank, then the OneSite accounting will print the micker line, it will print the company information, it will print the current check for the checking account. And one big advantage of this is if a user is doing let's say a 300 check run out of 6 different bank accounts, he can do them all at once on blank stock, because the system will put the proper check number and bank account on the blank stock. However, if the user is using pre-printed check stock, because pre-printed checks are by definition tied to a specific bank account, users will have to print those checks one bank account at a time for as many checks as they have. They may have 300 checks for a bank account. That works great. But so users need to understand there are some pros and cons. I think there's a lot of interest out there for people to use pre-printed check stock, so this is a feature that I think is welcome, will be very welcome and coming. The way the user will set up their pre-printed check stock is they will go, first of all, to each individual checking account, and in this example here, we'll do that. We'll go to our cash management, we'll open up our checking account window, and we'll edit our Wells Fargo bank in this case. The user will then go to the check printing tab, which obviously contains information regarding how the check is going to be printed, and the user will choose either pre-printed check stock, blank check stock, which was the default before, or they will disable the check printing altogether, which means that the user does not intend to print any checks out of this checking account. So, and you can see that the screen changes instantly as we choose the various options for that. And when we go back and reselect the pre-printed check stock, the system pops up a little message that gives us some of the advantages of that pre-printed check stock. We'll then go ahead and choose whether it's pre-printed check stock. Notice that we have the ability on the pre-printed check stock to print the company address, or if that company address was already pre-printed on the checks, then we would uncheck this checkbox. But again, we give the user the flexibility of printing that information even on their pre-printed checks. Also, there's other information in terms of how many signature lines they have, and the feature that we've always had, the ability to upload the signature for that check. So that shows how we will do that. Okay. Also, well, we've pretty well talked about that, so we'll move on. I think we've described what this talks about here. When the user goes to print the checks, checks are printed by the user by going to the way that they currently do now, and that is by going to accounts payable, print, and selecting checks. In this screen, then the system would list all of the checks they have. In this particular bank account, I don't have any checks that are ready to be printed, but I still want to illustrate what the user does here. The user can select and filter the print checks. This is a feature that was added with the last release, but it's still the process for printing the checks. If the user prints, the user can print check batches in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, up to 100, or all checks at once. If they print all checks, if they print more than 200 checks at a given time, then OneSite accounting will automatically create a check run for offline printing, and that minimizes the impact of a large check run on system resources. The user will then receive an email notification when the check run is ready for downloading. In other words, the PDF is ready for downloading, and then the user will print that as they have always done for their check printing by printing the PDF file. This pre-printed check also works with check runs. Check runs is the option users have to, under accounts payable, to pick check runs. When the user adds a check run, they would add the information that they need for that check run and whether or not they're using pre-printed checks or not. If they use pre-printed checks, they are required. You can see here if I have blank check stop, then it's just going to print whatever checks I select in the next step. If I select pre-printed checks, I meant to have said if they select blank check stop, then they can, other information is selected in the next step. Pre-printed checks, they have to use and select the bank account at this level. Once the user has selected the check run information, they'll click on the Run button, and then they'll go ahead and begin to create or process that check run. The system will ask them what the beginning check number of that run is. They'll enter that, click OK, and then they'll continue. Another feature we've added is the ability to print the company logo on checks. This allows users, or our users, to, in a sense, promote the brand through their logo. It's a very straightforward process, and the way that is done is pretty much on the same screen we were just in. The user would come back over here to their cash management. They go into their checking accounts, edit the applicable checking account, and then they could add their logo using the check printing on the check printing tab. They would select a logo to print. They would upload their logo. And by the way, this also works either with pre-printed checks or with blank check stock. Once the user has done that, then they will print their checks, and this is an example of a check that's been printed with the logo. This little plum here is the logo for this particular company, and you can see it actually looks pretty nice. This was actually printed on blank check stock. We've also enhanced we've made enhancements to one of our standard reports, and also we're making some changes to our financial reports. First, let's talk about the changes that we've made to our bank register. On the bank register report, users now have the option to show, by selecting this checkbox here, Show Credit Details, how a particular credit was applied. This is a user voting item that we've had multiple requests from our voting group, our user group, and they've asked that they be able to track back by looking at a credit how that credit was applied to what bills. So what they'll do is when they run the report, they'll run their bills register report as they normally do by going to accounts payable, registers, and bill register. They'll select the option to print or show credit details. In other words, this is an option that they may or may not choose to have. And when they choose that and then run their report, the report will then show this additional information is highlighted here that shows basically the invoice number and the location or property to which that credit was applied. In this case, you can see here that we had a $150 credit, all of which has been applied, and we can see that $97.67 was applied with invoice number ABE1234 for the Alpha Apartments. There was a complete invoice paid off. In other words, it was a $2 invoice and it received a $2 credit for Stony Condos and so forth. Gives the user a lot of information and helps the user to see how the credit was applied. This can be real helpful to users when they're trying to talk with a vendor and the vendor says, well, why didn't you pay the $100 bill that I paid, that I sent you? You only gave me $25. The user can then go in and explain in detail where the other $75 of that bill was applied and reconcile that with the vendor quite easily now.
So this won't filter over to the check stub also? I'm
sorry?
This won't filter over to show on the check stub also, will it?
Not directly.
Okay.
It's in the report, although it's easy to do that in the report. In fact, there's a second way that the user can find that information, and that is that when the user can go to accounts payable, in fact, let me just show that here. If the user goes into accounts payable, clicks on account adjustments, and then let's say they select this bill, which or select this adjustment, and they want to see where this $150 was paid or how it was applied, we can see that it was applied in full, and then we can click this button here, and we can see that if we scroll over to the right, we see the same information we just saw on the check register report, the same detail, but again, it shows us how that $150 was applied. Was that Sue that just asked that question about the check register? Sue, I'll have to check. I can check that out pretty quickly. I'm not 100% sure if it does not show on the check stub. I don't believe it does, but I'll confirm that and get back to you on that.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So that's again another nice feature that we've added to the product. Also, as any of you close to the product know, we've added a significant enhancement. Actually, we introduced it first in April of this year, where we've created a whole new interface for creating financial reports. And this new interface gives users a much more natural and simpler experience when creating reports. However, we know that many accountants are very conservative and they like to use what they're used to, which is, of course, that's true of all of us. But there is a lot of expense in maintaining both a new and old interface, and so we will be sunsetting the old financial report interface in April of this year. The old report writer was actually referred to as the report writer wizard. It's now just referred to as the report writer. So, and what will happen in mid-April, we will switch all users to the new interface. Right now, users can switch when they want by going to their preferences, and in the displays section, near the bottom of the display section, they can turn on or off the new financial report writer. In April, we will do this automatically for them, and we will remove that option, so once we switch them over, they will be in the new report writer. I think users will like it, but it's just a matter of making sure that we get all our users transitioned over so we don't have to maintain both the old and the new interfaces. It gives us the ability to focus our resources on improving this, and we've done a lot to improve the financial report writer. So, having said that, we will we will be doing that in April. But we want to give users about 2.5 months to make those changes. In fact, one of the features or additions we've added to the financial reports is the ability for users to sort reports by dimensions. In the last release, we introduced the concept of dimensions and the power of dimensions. Most of our users don't use dimensions other than locations. Locations are a dimension which are used by most everyone. But there are other dimensions which could be used if the user so chose, such as vendors. There are also project dimension and other dimensions which allow the user more power. We don't expect a lot of users to pick up many dimensions, but there is a request for users when they create a report to be able to sort their report by location if that's how they've created their report. So in that sense, then we've created that, we've added that ability to do that. And so the way the user would set this up is they would create a location group by going to company and adding a location group. So if they go here, let's say to company, they go to and add a location group. The user then would add their group, and then in the group type, they'd either specify, just as they do always, their specific members or all members, and then they could sort those members. For example, we may want to create a group that says, let's say, active locations. And for the sake of example, let's say that didn't exist right yet. So this would be all active locations. And one of the advantages of doing something like this and using the filter is that this will filter dynamically if we set it up correctly on what is active, and I'll discuss that here in a second. So we go in there, we create our ascending, and we can base, since this is a location group, we can have this location group be sorted on any of the fields that are in the location page. In this case, let's say that we want to sort it by location name, and we could restrict it to the first 3 or 5 matches. Normally we'll leave that blank to show all members. We do want to check this box here that says dimension structure. In fact, this is required that you check this dimension structure box. Otherwise, the financial reports won't be able to use a dimension that we create without that. And then in this case, we would go in and say the status of this this particular of this location group will filter it so that it only works for all properties who have a status of active. So in other words, if we go and inactivate a property, by virtue of the fact of inactivating that property, it would no longer show up when we use this particular location group. We would then save our location group. We would then, when we are creating our financial report, we would use that particular structure in our financial report. As we added a new report or used an existing report, we would simply say that we would create our report structure, and then we'd go ahead and just use that report structure by selecting it here as we normally would through and here we would add our active locations that we just added, and that's how we would use that. And as an example, let's say that I have created a report much like I've just shown you there, and you can see now that this report would be sorted by the criteria that I ask it to be sorted by. We've also updated a number of screens. We have been, for the last year or so, maybe longer, we've been in a process of updating and improving the look and feel of all of the screens within OneSite accounting. And so we have continued that, and this update we've actually changed 4 screens: the My Preferences, the Accounts Payable configuration screen, the Accounts Receivable configuration screen, and the Subscription screen. And the advantage here for these updates are, one is that the Save and Cancel buttons do not scroll off the screen when we scroll the screen, and I'll show you that in a minute. The layout of the screens are much cleaner, much more intuitive. It's much easier to find what the user is looking for. The ability to drag and drop enhancements is much easier to use on the new screens because of the new capabilities that are built into the screens. There's some regrouping and renaming that have clarified what the user sees. For example, here I mentioned that on the My Preferences page, it's been updated. Here is an example of what the old My Preferences page looked like. If we go to the new My Preferences page, we go there, as you know, either going through Company and selecting My Preferences, or we can also go through at the top and go to My Preferences. And the new My Preferences screen looks like this. And you can see here it's much cleaner, a lot more space. We can expand and collapse the various sections. So here, let's say that I want to look at I'm looking for something. I can come down here and just collapse these other screens so I can focus, for example, on my display section. And by the way, if I was in the display section, this ability to I was looking for a particular thing. I don't see it here. I think it's there. I just don't see it at the moment. But the ability to show to find what we want. Another advantage is we can use just the functionality of the browser. That let's say I know there's a field out there that's got something about email. I can type email, and you can see as I type it here in the lower left corner, just by clicking Control F, I can then find the field, any field that has the spelling, the word spelled the way I spelled it in the search or in the find field. Again, another nice feature. Couple of other things here just to show some of the other technology we've built in. For example, we can manage the way the menu order appears. It's very nice because let's say that I personally would like my general ledger to always show first, and then I'd like my platforms to be the second menu item across the top here. When I do that, it reorders my menus at the top the way I've asked it to. So when I save this, and notice here again the save button did not scroll off the screen. So when I save this, you'll see that this screen will refresh in a minute and accept those changes the way that I just set them, general ledger and then platform and then accounts payable, the way I just asked it to do. Again, it's very nice. Moving on to the configuration pages. Users, we've also updated the configuration pages. For example, the old accounts payable configuration page looked like this. It was okay, but it was kind of all just all run together. With the new, with this feature, in this release, when the user goes to accounts payable setup and opens their configure accounts payable screen, you can see that the layout is the same as what we just saw in the My Preferences window. In other words, users can collapse or expand the various sections. The layout is clean and crisp. They can see what they're looking for. It's not much together. Very nice, and it makes it easier for people to see what they're looking for. Has the same advantages as any of the screens that we've added. Again, notice that the Save button is staying at the top, and we can see what we're looking for much easier. The accounts receivable configuration page is pretty much the same as the accounts payable screen, so there is we won't look at that right now, but it is pretty much the same outline and duplicate demo, if you will. We've also updated the subscriptions page, if my demo will show that. Oh, I know why, because I'm not there. So again, we have the old subscriptions page. Most users don't necessarily need to go into the subscriptions page, but for people who set up our users' subscriptions, it is designed to make things much easier to find. And again, the process there is the user will go to their subscriptions page by going to company. Shouldn't have moved that. Things moved here. They will go to company, subscriptions, and in the subscriptions page, you'll notice now that rather than having a list of line items, the list is little pictures. And the pictures here show, starting with what applications this particular company is already subscribed to, and then what other applications are available for subscription in the future. When the user selects any of these companies, it basically takes them to the configuration page, much like the configuration page that we were in a minute ago. In fact, it is the same configuration page. And the user will, when the user clicks configure, they'll get a little pop-up window that describes what that subscription is for. They can then go to the configure, and it opens the configuration page that they would normally get to by other ways. So this is, again, a feature that's only changing the way the user interfaces rather than the way the user gives the user new features. All right, and that's pretty well what I have prepared. Are there any questions?
Bill, I have a question. After every release, we generally have to have clients clear their cache. Is that going to happen again this time?
I have not heard anything from the technical people. Probably not a bad idea, but I have not heard anything specifically that they'll need to do that. I can't think of anything in this release that may require that. But I would have to check with the developers to see who is this, and I will let you know. Or who would like to know, and I will. I can actually send an update on that when I send out the release notes.
Okay.
Okay, great.
It's Alice. I don't know if you heard you. That was Alice.
Hi, Alice.
I have another. Oh, go on.
Oh, go ahead, Alice.
Oh, I have another question. When it comes to the check permissions, will users automatically be assigned those, or is the admin going to get that and then they pass it down to their staff?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. The way that it'll work, if any user who had access to that void link before, which in the past, with the current release, that was controlled if they had access to that report, the bank register report. If they had access to the bank register report, we will migrate their data so that those users automatically get that permission turned on. If they did not have access to that report, they won't get that permission. So the bottom line is they'll have the same permission that they had before. And then now the administrators can go in and adjust that as needed. But what they have today is what they should have Saturday morning after we have the release completed.
So if they're a read-only person and they have access to the check register, they will have access to void checks, but the administrator has to go uncheck that box so they can't void
Well,
checks.
again, if they had, it depends, if they, before they had that permission if they had access to the report, and the report is just either they had it or they didn't, as you know.
Right,
And so if they had it before, they'll get it. If they didn't, they won't. It's
Okay.
the design of it is whatever you had before, we're not going to change it unless the administrator wants to change it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bill, I just had a quick question. This is Bryce.
Hi, Bryce.
And hey, on what we just looked at on the subscriptions, so they still will be able to see all of the subscriptions available under the Intech platform, right?
Yeah, whatever they can see today, they can still see. They'll just see it in a little different format.
Okay, so do you know, is that in the works? I know we've talked about it before, I believe, but maybe excluding some of those modules that we don't use.
I can talk to Amit, who's probably the one who knows the most about what's coming down on the roadmap. Well, actually, there are a lot of us that know what's on the roadmap, but Amit's probably as good as anyone. I'll ask Amit about that. I have not heard anything specifically.
Okay.
So, but I can ask about that.
All right, I appreciate it, because it's just now they look really nice and pretty, so it's even more incentive to click on them and to use them.
But and they don't want to do that any more than they wanted to before. But your observation is very legitimate.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, and this is from what I noticed with someone a little while back with the new financial report writer. When you were doing stuff in IE8, it won't save. I had to update to IE10 so that it would save.
Okay.
Well, I just did to IE10,
and we are encouraging users to migrate away from IE8. IE8 does have some issues, not a lot, but there is an occasional issues such as you've just mentioned with IE8. We want to get users using IE 9 or 10, not 11. There are also some reservations about IE 11. So we do want users to move up from 8, but not to 11 yet. So yes, I'm not surprised that you're having an issue with that. If you've entered a ticket on that, we'll address that as we can. But
I think I did, and I don't know if it's closed or not now. But
okay.
Yeah, we have one out there.
The problem is the further we move down the road with increased features and functionality, the harder it is to maintain the old technology. And you've seen that happen as we move to the what we call the 2012 interface. You're seeing that as we move to the new report writer interface, and it's just a matter of we have to move users along. The problem is at some point users have to upgrade their hardware to accommodate what's required by new browsers, but unfortunately that's a real world situation where many companies are doing that. So I mean it's inevitable that we're all going to have to keep pace with what technology is doing if we want to keep using the programs we're using, including OneSite accounting.
And Dorica had a question that she wanted to ask, but she asked if I would ask it.
Okay.
And with the bank account restrictions that you're putting in place, will that affect strictly users, or it should not affect the STEs and how the bank deposits won't come over because of these? I mean, they should still continue to come over, even with those bank account restrictions for the entity levels or whatever.
I don't know how that's going to handle. I would expect it. If it's restricted, it's restricted. I don't know that particular question. So you're asking if can I deposit money into a bank account from a property who's not authorized, or let me rephrase that. Your question is, can I deposit money into a bank account that's restricted for a given property?
Yeah, it should feed seamlessly across, but yeah.
I would be surprised if you can, because in my mind the definition of restriction is restriction. I don't know that answer though, and I'll have to
Yeah,
find
but
out.
it's restricted to a user, so it
Well,
shouldn't
no,
impact.
no. My example there, and I was afraid that that might be confusing. In the example, the user was restricted because he was set up as a restricted user. And you'll see this in the release notes when they come out. The second line of that matrix was the user is unrestricted, but the bank accounts are still restricted based on what the locations are allowed for that bank account. So in that sense, it's independent of the user. If the user is unrestricted, the
Okay.
bank account's still going to be restricted based on what the administrator defined as restricted or not restricted.
Okay, so we'll see what happens then.
Okay.
Also on that, Sue, all of the transactions for leasing and rents come through on the OneSite users, and that OneSite users should never be restricted to any
Right.
properties on that, so you won't run into anything like that as far as the user being restricted. I would imagine the only problem you could possibly have is if one of the bank accounts that they're using in leasing and rents has been restricted on the accounting side on that, and then I would think it would work kind of like the vendor restrictions now,
Yeah.
where if the vendor's not available to that property, then the SDE will error out on that. So
it should be pretty seamless, and we shouldn't have any problems. Okay.
yeah, it should work just like with the vendor restrictions.
Right. Okay.
All right. Thank you for those good questions. Anything else? Well, great. We just made it under our 1 hour line, so thank you very much. Within the next couple of days, I expect to send out the release notes, and I'll answer these questions also. Thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.